Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to take a look at something we've been asked about quite often. How do you install Nx Witness or Nx Meta on a Raspberry Pi device? First off, we need to understand what a Raspberry Pi is. So a Raspberry Pi is a little bitty microcomputer. Looks like this. And it was launched originally in 2012, and it was designed for the, I believe originally for the one laptop per child program, where they wanted to create a $100 laptop that could be sold anywhere in the world to help children in developing nations learn about technology, be able to code, be able to fix their computers, kind of all that good stuff. So they came out with this, the Raspberry Pi Foundation was formed, they came out with this tiny little $35 computer. This is a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B, and so it has a decent amount of RAM in it, a pretty good little ARM processor, and one thing the Raspberry Pi does not have is a SATA connector. So in order to install Nx Witness or Nx Meta on here, you're going to need some form of storage, right? Well, there's two ways to do that. You could hook up to a NAS device and just store directly to a NAS, or more ideally, you can have a higher capacity SD card. So, lucky for us, we are cooperating with Western Digital, and we're taking a look at their WD Purple SD cards. And these are SD cards that were designed specifically for surveillance recording and archiving, mainly for putting in cameras, but they work just as well for the Raspberry Pi. And with these WD Purple SD cards right now, they go up to 512 gigabytes, which is what this tiny little thing is right here. And in next month in November, or in 2 months in November, they're going to launch a 1 terabyte version of this. So basically for 4 HD cameras, you're going to get quite a long storage duration out of these things. So what we're going to do today is install the WD Purple SD card with a Raspberry Pi operating system, put it in the Raspberry Pi, and then we're going to install Nx Witness. So if you're looking for like a Raspberry Pi kit, there's a thing called a Cana kit, and it includes kind of all the little accessories you're going to need to set up your Raspberry Pi, power supply, all that kind of good stuff. And a little USB SD dongle that'll allow you to program the Raspberry Pi card. So let's get started here. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and program this SD card. We're going to have to format it, and then we're going to have to install the operating system on it. So plug that into your little USB dongle or whatever you've got to get it hooked up into your computer. And that's the sound of the SD card going into my computer. And then you're going to want to download the Raspberry Pi Imager. So it looks like this, little program like this. And we're going to just go ahead. There's lots of different operating systems you can install from here. We're going to just choose the regular old 32-bit Raspberry Pi desktop version. And basically you choose your SD card. You can see right there it's 512 gigabytes, and you press write, and then it's going to erase anything that's on there, and it's going to format the card, and it's going to write. So while this is going on, it only takes a couple minutes, but I'm going to pause the video so you're not bored out of your mind while we do this. So let me pause that video. Alright, so the Raspberry Pi OS 32-bit has been downloaded and written to my USB. So I can unplug it now. And the next step is you're going to take it out of your little dongle or whatever you use to write the OS to the SD card. And hopefully you have better fingernails than I do. But so you got the SD card out. You take the Raspberry Pi, and in the back here there's a tiny little slot for the Raspberry Pi. You're going to insert it with the what do you call it? Connectors facing up. And then you're good to go. So now I'm going to go and plug it in to my system where I got my power set up. And while I do that, I'm going to pause the video as well. And I keep on opening the wrong recorder interface, but I'm going to go pause the video. And then I've got a camera set up so we can see it live stream as we're programming it. So give me a second. Alright, so the Raspberry Pi has booted up, and you can see the first message we get is, welcome to the Raspberry Pi desktop. Before you start using it, if you're using the setup, press next to get started. So I'm going to go press next to get started. So as you can see, it asks me for my location, my keyboard settings, kind of all that good stuff. It's going to set up the location, and then it's going to ask me to reset my password, I believe, but let's see. Yep, got to change my default password. So set a password you're obviously going to remember that isn't too weak. So the next thing is it's just going to ask you if your screen shows a black border, which mine does, and then you press next. And then, as you saw, I'm going to connect to a wireless network. You can use it with an Ethernet cable, which I'm going to set up later for a more stable network connection. But Wi-Fi is just as well if you have a good Wi-Fi network. So I'm going to go ahead, and it wants me to update the software. So I'm going to press next. So it's checking on the different distros out there and the different updates to Linux and the Raspberry Pi operating system, and it's going to update the Raspberry Pi. Instead of making you guys watch this again and be bored out of your mind, I'm going to just go ahead and press pause on the video, and after the update is complete, then I'll come back. As you see, it's happening pretty quick, so it should just be a minute or two. So you can see the updates are almost complete. Once it installs the updates, then it's probably going to ask you to reboot. It's going to automatically reboot. Just let it do its thing, and we'll come back as soon as the updates are applied. So updates are now complete, and you have to restart your Raspberry Pi to get started. So that's what we're about to do. Give me a sec. Alright, so the Raspberry Pi is restarted. There's one more thing we want to do before we move on, and that is to enable SSH on your Raspberry Pi, because that's how we're going to connect remotely and install Nx Witness or Nx Meta VMS. In this case, we're going to install Nx Witness VMS because I'm going to add it to my demo system here. So we're going to go enable SSH. The way to do that is click on the Raspberry Pi at the top and then go to settings and configuration, I think, and then interfaces, and then you're going to enable SSH, and you can watch me while I do it. So SSH is just a way to connect remotely over an unsecured network to devices to allow you to kind of manage those devices. And it's a secure shell, right? It's a cryptographic network protocol. And it's basically for command line. This is how you can log into Linux computers remotely, Windows computers, all sorts of things, and basically manage those devices, install software, that sort of stuff. So we're going to connect to the Pi. So the first thing we're going to do is open up the command prompt on Windows, and then we're going to go SSH at. One very important thing that I forgot to do, that I'm about to do, is grab the IP address. SSH pi at, sorry. Pi is the name of the device, or the username of the device, and the at, and then the IP address. So to get the IP address, you're going to click on the terminal icon here on the Raspberry Pi interface, and you're going to type in ifconfig. Alright, so now you can see when I typed in ifconfig, it gives me the IP address right here under INET, 192.168.68.131. So we're going to go SSH pi at 192.168.68.131. And then it asks me, am I sure? I'm like, yes. Right? And then it's going to ask me for the password that I set up earlier when I was setting up the Pi. Okay, and so now I'm in, right, to the Raspberry Pi. So the next thing you want to do is go to support.networkoptix.com and log into the guide. Just go to support.networkoptix.com and then go to the search, right, and type in ARM installation, and you'll see ARM single board installation instructions, right? So actually I'm going to grab this link and I'm going to throw it into my web pages so we can open it up. ARM installation, right? Press OK. So now we can see the installation guide for the ARM installation. So this is fairly simple, right? So the first thing you want to do is switch to root. Okay, so you're going to go back into your command prompt. So Alt Tab on Windows to show you all your open programs, and we're going to type in sudo su, right? And what that does is it logs me in as the root user, so now I can install software and make changes to the device, right? And you need to do that with your with the administrator password you set up at the beginning. The next thing I'm going to do is change directory, and then go to the home directory, right? So now you can see here I was at home/pi. Now I'm just in the root directory, right? So and to check what's there, you can just type ls, and that's going to list everything that's there, right, in that root directory. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have to download from the internet, wget, and we're going to have to download the version of the software that we want to install. So I'm running a patch, the September 2020 monthly patch, which is 31.767, I believe. So to get the ARM package, you're going to go to NX Cloud, and you're going to go to download Nx Witness. And then over here under other releases, patches, and beta versions, if you click there, if you have the rights, if you're one of our resellers, then you'll be able to see the patches. The other thing you can do is go to my.networkoptix.com and go to downloads, and then you can go to the ARM devices here, and you're going to grab the Raspberry Pi server installer. So if we just go here and copy this link address, that's fine. And now we can go back to terminal, and we can paste it in. You just right click in terminal to paste it in. Okay, so we're going to go wget, and then we're going to go ahead and download. So what it's doing right now, and I'm downloading the wrong version actually, 3.1.398. That's actually the release version. So I just made a mistake. Not to worry. Go to monthly patch here. Do the same thing. Go to ARM devices. Grab the link address. Go back here. Just let this finish. If you made a mistake like I did, it's not a big deal. And we're going to do a wget again, and then right click and paste the right one in there, which is 31.767. and press enter. And then again, it's going to download it. It should just take a minute or two because it's about a 100 meg file. So it should download really quickly. So I'm going to let this download because, you know, it's going to be a minute, but you guys aren't that bored, right? So while this is downloading, it's going to download it and put it into the root directory, right? So in just a second, I'm going to actually go in and open that file, right? So let's go back to our interface. So after I've got that file, if I go and do ls again on terminal, press enter, now you can see there's two packages here, right? So I'm actually going to remove one. I'm going to do a rm, and then I'm going to go Nx Witness Server 398 is the one I'll remove. So one thing that you can do in terminal that's really nice is you can start to type something, press tab, it'll fill out everything it can up until that point, and if you give it a little bit more information like 31398, press tab again, it'll autofill that in there. So I just removed that file. So if I go to ls again, you can see that file is gone. So I just removed it out of my directory since I made a mistake. So now I'm going to do a dpackage, right? -i install, and then I'm going to put in the /, and then I'm going to type in nx again and press tab, and it's going to fill that out for me. And I'm going to go ahead and press OK. So now it's going to install that package that I have that I just installed over SSH on the Raspberry Pi. So if you tab, you'll go to OK. This is the end user licensing agreement. Nothing nefarious in there. So go press OK, and then again confirm with a yes, right? Press enter and watch it install. It should just take a few seconds, right, to unpack it and install it on the Raspberry Pi device itself. So, don't prove me wrong, terminal. Do it quickly. It is a very lightweight package. Again, it's 32-bit Raspbian or Raspberry Pi OS, depending on how you want to refer to it. And now it's going to check and see if the server's running. Once it's up and running, it says, oh, look, installation is complete, but now you need to use your network Optic Nx Witness client and click the new system tile to access the and set up the system. Right, so I'm going to press OK, and I'm done. I can close terminal now. Right, so in your Nx Witness client, you can just disconnect, right, and you're going to see a new server set up at the IP address. Right. One thing to remember, you're going to need your server IP address that's already in your system, at least one of them. So I got one at 116. So we're going to remember that. So let me disconnect again. So underneath the new server tile for the Raspberry Pi, I'm going to click on that. It's going to ask me if I want to set up a new system or add to existing system. I'm going to add to existing system, and this is where I need that IP address that I just remembered, 116. Right, and I'm going to log in with my cloud credentials and press next, and boom, that is a Raspberry Pi set up on my system. And you can see over here now it says server Raspberry Pi. I'm just going to change it to Raspberry Pi, right? And if I click on that and go to server settings, you can see I've got the IP address of 131. It's the Raspberry Pi. I can enable failover. One thing to note on ARM devices is we do have a maximum of 12 cameras right now that are allowed on an ARM device. That can be changed, but it's a default out of the box kind of limitation. Under storage management, I'm going to check the storage device. I got 470 gigs roughly left over after installing the OS. And I'm going to turn on storage, or I'm going to check on that and make sure it's enabled. Everything's cool. Everything looks good. And I'm going to just press apply. So now I can start moving cameras to it, right? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras. So let's move them over there. Right now, the Raspberry Pi running the server application itself. You know what? I'm going to open up a new tab. So if I go to the Raspberry Pi and look at its CPU usage and RAM, it's at 0% right now, which is a 1% CPU. So it's just basically sitting there, right? And if I pull in the NX2 live monitor stream, well, I mean, it's still close to 0% CPU usage. So I'm going to move that stream over to the Raspberry Pi, and you should see a bump up to 1%. There you go. Now I'm going to take the rest of these cameras, 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras. Each one of these is 1080p or higher, and I'm going to drag them over to the Raspberry Pi. And I'm going to go to my NX2 here, and I'm going to set it up now because it's a real system. I got multi-servers. They both have failover enabled, and the cameras are now recording on the Raspberry Pi. And you can see I've jumped up to about 22% CPU usage. And that includes like both of these cameras that are coming in at 2560 by 1920. I've got the Garage AI camera that's coming in at 4K at 30 frames per second. And I've got my backyard PTZ. Everything still works exactly the way it's supposed to work, right? So zoom in, zoom out, you can see the performance on it. CPU is sitting around 20% with 5 cameras on it, all HD or HD+, right, up to 4K. So this is how you set up a Raspberry Pi for Nx Witness. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. I've now got an additional server on my system. It's all running over Wi-Fi. You can see I'm not getting any frame drops. I'm still running 30 frames per second on all the cameras. It's pretty cool. Where is this useful? We had a lot of requests come out of like Australia and places where they have remote monitoring going up, where you've got a lot of different spread out sites, let's say like telco sites, where you've got maybe a junction or a power junction on power lines, and you need to have a really small computer there that allows you to still connect and review over like 4G or 5G or 3G even, and capture that video locally, but then get alerts when there's certain events that have happened. Maybe they're solar powered as well. That's why you want a low powered device like a Raspberry Pi. You can buy environmental enclosures for them. You can really kit these things out nowadays because it is, you know, the 4th generation of these devices. And as an ARM device, you can see it's running really low CPU with 5 high-res cameras on it. 15% CPU. The screen went off, so it just dropped down a bit. But basically, you're talking about you know, a device that should hopefully never fail if you're running at 20% CPU usage, because you know, you're just not using, you're not creating a lot of heat on the device, and it's not creating a lot of entropy, and so that device should be pretty stable. But this is how you set up a Raspberry Pi. Again, with Western Digital Purple cards, the WD Purple cards, they are engineered for surveillance, right? Let me pull that back in here so you guys can take a look. So again, these are engineers for surveillance. They're not your standard SD cards. We wouldn't recommend this in the past with a standard SD card because you got a lot of failures in SD cards. The WD Purple cards themselves, again, they're going to go up to 1 TB here very soon. Right now they're available in 128, 256, 512 gigabytes. So you can get a lot of storage out of it. If we look at right now the storage for this device, and we look at storage analytics, well, I mean, it hasn't been recording very long, but we could take a look in a few minutes and go to forecast, longest period available. And right now it's saying, you know, with all 5 of these cameras, 4K plus running at full frame rate and everything, I've got about 5 days and 21 hours, right, for a 512 gigabyte. So if I've got a 1 terabyte in with, you know, 4 cameras recording to it, then I'm going to look at, you know, anywhere up to close to 2 weeks, right? So it's a viable solution for remote monitoring, for robotics, for autonomous robotics with AI built into them, capturing metadata and video. I mean, there's all sorts of usage for these things. Home automation. Really cool little device and really simple to set up. Raspberry Pi, Western Digital WD Purple SD cards, and Nx Witness VMS or Nx Meta if you're developing something and you just need a little server to play with. So check it out. Thanks, guys. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below.